Welcome to the Bros of Gardening. I'm your host, Mike Westphal, joined always by my co-host, Daniel Van Dyke. How you doing today?
I'm doing good, bud. I'm excited about this topic we've got today. This is one we get a lot of questions about, have mixed feelings on, but maybe not as controversial as some people think.
That's right. And we're joined by Alex, always, to help guide us through this podcast. How you doing today?
Doing pretty good, Mike.
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting topic. We haven't delved into this one super, in depth. We've mentioned natives here and there throughout the podcast, but we'll get into it. So
I think this is one of those hot words that people love to throw out there, but they don't always necessarily know what it is actually referring to. And
it also comes and goes. It feels like in gardening, sometimes it's the trendy thing, and then it goes away and comes back. So get us into it.
What are native plants? And why are they so controversial? Let's go right off the bat.
So I don't think they are super controversial, honestly. I think whether you know it or not, you probably are growing some anyways that are just popular plants. Now, I think the controversial part is some people that truly believe you should only be planting natives. That really is a very small group, and it's a very controversial one because then it's no other plants. You get rid of all invasive species, you get rid of all commercial grown plants. Even like boxwoods or hollies. Because it's not a native species, and then you can get really hyper focused and say this is only native to our area.
Oh boy.
I think it's also part of it is. When you drive around and you see just an overgrown area, is that what you think a native area looks like? So most likely it's not. It's probably weeds and non-native invasive species that have overgrown. So a lot of us say, well, do you see a lot of just naturally growing, amazing looking plants? I think that's also part of it, right? So if you're just, hiking in the woods, maybe you see a really pretty plant every so often. But you don't see a ton of them, so it's not like you're walking through the woods and you see, azaleas.
A botanical garden. Yeah.
Right. So they're few and far between, and most native species aren't what you typically would think of in your head. Something that's going to be super blooming, nice and tidy and compact. All of those attributes are done through hybridizing and different cultivars, which is, I think, also part of this controversy, which is a native cultivar. So that is, or a nativar, which is taking a native plant and hybridizing it to get some native attributes, like drought resistance, but then adding in more blooms or a smaller plant. Now, when you do that, you lose some of the native attributes, which are maybe it's a food for a certain beneficial insect or a certain animal that grazes on it. Now it doesn't like that nativar. So it can be controversial, but it doesn't have to be, right? I mean, native plants, to me, are things that grow naturally in your region that you live in that can be used as good landscape plants, and typically they're perennials. Trees and shrubs are typically what we're talking about when it's natives, because they're things that live year over year over year in your landscape or in your yard or in your natural surroundings. And hopefully they're somewhat beneficial to certain things. I mean, certainly if you live in deer country, you might want some native plants because that they're not going to get eaten by deer. Otherwise, they wouldn't be native to that area that has deer.
So, and I think that's, what Mike said is exactly right. And I think the controversy really comes in the concept of what natives are. So, we have customers all the time that'll call us up and they want a native garden. They want, we want to use all natives. And on the surface, you think, like Mike said, if you're like, I can find a plant that grows well here, it's native to this area, it's going to look great, come back year after year, in their mind, they're thinking, I'll just, replace A for B and I'll get the same result. That's just not the case. And so that's where I think the controversy comes from on our end is, we are happy to plant native gardens. We've had native gardens, but you have to know what you're signing up for. Like Mike just alluded to, you don't see a lot of, nice, dense, blooming evergreens when you're just walking through the forest. Again, you might find some, here and there kind of scattered around, but they're not very prevalent. And so a lot of times it's things that might be a little more wild looking. They might not grow as compactly, or they might not have as full of a
lot of them spread.
Exactly. They spread. And so I think for us, what it is trying to educate the customer on what the natives are and what they actually are signing up for. Because a lot of times it is a more natural, more wild look. But for us on the landscape side of things, when we're doing a design, we're trying to go for the functionality, of course, but we also want to create the aesthetic wow factor. And so that's hard to do sometimes with natives. And so, again, I think there are definitely a place for it. There's a lot of natural benefits. And if you are trying to encourage a lot of wildlife, maybe a native garden in your backyard or something to that effect, it could be a great idea. I just always like to forewarn customers that, if you're looking for something that's going to look really nice throughout hopefully 10, 12 months out of the year, a native garden might not fit the bill for you, and you might want to mix in some more, when I say classic now, like Mike said, but your boxwoods, your azaleas, things that have been, hybridized to create, a better blooming cycle, a more compact shape, a fuller shape, disease resistant, all those types of things that were, genetically, modified to improve upon the plant. But that's so the native aspect for it on our end is there are different grants and things like that are offered through our local city government that if you plant a certain amount of natives in the conservation gardening and things like that, they will actually help the financial side of it. So that has brought on a lot more requests for natives on our end. But again, then it gets into that muddy water of native R's versus natives. So, you start to kind of push, okay, what can we get away with that will still fit the bill and still accomplish what we want to accomplish, but they might not be a true native to the southeastern part of Virginia. So that's where I'd say the quote unquote controversy comes from is on the surface, of course, I'd love to plant something that grows here naturally. It's probably going to perform better. It should be less maintenance, but that's not necessarily always the case. And so that's what we just always try to kind of educate people on what they're signing up for, never trying to steer them away from it, but just making sure they understand what they're getting.
I'll give you a quick example that maybe helps kind of explain it, which is in a lawn. So, you think of lawn grasses, there's lots of them, especially in our area. We are in a transitional zone where it's not quite cool season grasses, it's not quite warm season grasses. But what grass naturally grows in our area? Bermuda. So that would be a native grass. Now, Bermuda that grows native to here is what a lot of people call wiregrass. It's a very coarse Bermuda. It's very salt tolerant. It's not super attractive. So that's your native lawn grass here is Bermuda. Now, there are different hybrids of Bermuda that are much prettier. So you can get a golf course type of Bermuda and have a very nice lawn and be growing a native R. But fescue is not particularly native, and zoysia and St. Augustine are not typically very native. So those are grasses that you can grow in this area. So it's really just kind of up to the person, and that's why I say it doesn't have to be that controversial. You should use some natives. There are lots of natives that you might be growing. Redbuds, very common tree. It's a native tree. Dogwoods. There's native dogwoods. Now, there's cultivars of dogwoods that bloom at a bit of an earlier age because our native dogwood typically doesn't bloom for the first 5 to 10 years of its life. But fringe trees, super popular. Service berries are one of my all-time favorite large shrubs, small trees that we talked about many times on here. So there are some really nice native plants. And a lot of them are trees and shrubs, and we'll talk a little bit more about varieties, or different native plants specifically. But that just gives you kind of an idea of why it doesn't have to be that controversial. You've probably got some natives in your yard already.
Nice. Well, so Dana, you touched on it a little, but what is your full stance on natives, and how often do you implement them into your landscape projects? Yeah,
so I mean, it's really kind of by request, and again, I have no issue with doing the natives. We just really try to make sure that people understand what they're signing up for. But I do think they are becoming increasingly popular. So, some of the benefits of the natives are usually they have a very positive impact on the environment. They can be different types of food, shelter, different things for different wildlife. And so, and whether that's insects, birds, whatever the case may be. So there's a lot of benefits to that are attractive to different customers. And so usually what we try to do is we try to talk them into implementing either pockets of natives or a native garden, as opposed to just planting an entire, because, kind of a rule of thumb, and there are different evergreens, but a lot of natives, in this area they're perennials and stuff like that. They do come back. But, when you're doing shrub and foundation planting, you want something that's going to be nice and tight, something that might have a well manicured look to it, but that you don't necessarily have to do a lot of maintenance to. Yeah. Obviously, low maintenance gardening. And that's another thing, too. Low maintenance, people associate native with low maintenance. And so you would think, oh, it grows naturally. You don't have to do a lot. It'll grow on its own.
It'll be fine.
Well, again, you're talking about something that grows naturally in the forest, not something that's growing in front of your house. So when it comes to the maintenance aspect, sometimes natives can be extremely maintenance heavy unless you are okay with this wild natural look on the front of your house. And so that's where I just always try to warn people, just plan accordingly. And when you're doing the design, certainly incorporate your natives. There's a lot of benefits for it. It's good for the soil. I mean, there's a lot of different things. But kind of be strategic with it as opposed to planting a full slot of natives across like the front of your foundation of your house. And so, as far as my stance on natives, I'd say it's a bit of a love-hate relationship for the simple fact that our goal is we always want to impress and we never want to underwhelm customers. And so we can go in and implement and plant a really, really nice native garden. And when you step back and look at it, it might not be as impressive as if you had gone in and planted with some different hybrids and some different things like that. And so we never want our customers to feel underwhelmed when we're done. And so that is probably my biggest issue with natives. And that's what we've really harped on more recently with our designers, training them on really kind of educating customers on what natives are, what it's going to look like 12 months out of the year, kind of go through that process with them of what their garden will how it will evolve. And really, again, if you want to have a nice, clean, mulched bed and stuff like that, so that a little bit more of that well-manicured look, again, you just need to kind of pick and choose your spots on where you use them.
Gotcha. So, Mike, why do native plants sometimes struggle their first year, even though they're low maintenance?
Yeah. I mean, that low maintenance, it's almost always placement, right? I mean, so I don't think they're super hard to grow the first year. It depends. There's two different sides of this, I think. There's placement. Are you placing in the right place? A lot of natives grow in specific areas naturally in our area because they needed something. So like one of my new favorites that I'm going to have to turn Daniel onto, and maybe he uses it, I don't know, is ostrich fern. It's an amazing fern. I've never seen a big patch of it until I was visiting, I think it was a garden center in Pennsylvania. So eastern side of the U.S., grows natively, loves moist, shady locations. I'm sure Daniel deals with a lot of those.
Yep.
And this fern is gorgeous. I mean, it gets 3 by 3. It's big. It spreads. So it does spread, as we know, as we said, a lot of natives spread. So you might have to control it a little bit.
Right.
But it is a gorgeous, gorgeous fern that comes back perennial. It does die off in the winter. But it solves a problem, which is now, if you go plant this fern in sunny, dry soil, it is going to die. It's actually somewhat hard for us to maintain in the pots that we have right now. If you miss a couple days of watering, that thing's fried. Now it'll come back if you get on top of it pretty quickly. So I think it's placement a lot of times. Taking another one that I really like is Rudbeckia, which is Black-Eyed Susan. Daniel's mentioned that one. That's a great one. Now there's lots of cultivars, native cultivars of the Black-Eyed Susan, but the one local to us is actually called orange coneflower. I don't know why they call it that. I wish they didn't. It's just an old common name. Orange coneflower. It is not a coneflower. It's a Rudbeckia. It's a Black-Eyed Susan. And it's not orange. It's yellow. So I don't know why they call it that. But that's just the old name. But Rudbeckia fulgida, I think is how you pronounce the Latin portion of that. That is the native Black-Eyed Susan to our area. And it grows in full sun.
Yep.
Once it's established, can take hot, dry conditions. So that's what that one needs. So as long as you're planting in the right place. Now, a lot of native plants, typically you're getting at, local plant, or not local. What are they called? Like the plant swaps, and where people do plant sales, like at museums or botanical gardens,
right?
Yeah, I mean, and so these are little plants grown from seed, most likely volunteers, as we might call them. So let's go back to the ostrich fern. So an ostrich fern, creates through stolons and tubers and runners a new ostrich fern. It's gonna be small the first year. So this is an old thing that I actually had forgotten until I kind of thought about this. There's an old adage of a 3-year kind of time frame with a plant, which is sleep, creep, and leap. Have you ever heard that before? I think your dad taught me that.
Yeah.
Daniel. That's an old one. So sleep is the first year, which is where it's just forming the plant. Then it's creep. So the root system grows the second year, and then the third year is leap. So that might be part of it too, is a lot of people buying some of these native plants in smaller forms. They're in their sleep stage. So that first year that they get them is the sleep, and then the next year is creep, and they're like, what is happening? This thing is struggling. And then the next year is leap. So you might just need to be patient sometimes. And then it's location. I mean, you always got to pick the right places. And then the other funny part of this is like milkweed. Milkweed is a very, very big, popular native. There's tropical milkweed, which are super attractant to the monarchs. So we're talking monarchs. Monarchs only lay their eggs on milkweed. So this is a little bit of the controversy, right? There's tropical milkweed, which the monarchs would love to find. And we sell tropical milkweed. If you're trying to attract them into your yard, then it's a great way to get them to flock to your yard and lay their eggs. And the caterpillars will eat up the tropical milkweed. It won't make it through the winter. But what we really want is people to plant more of the common milkweed, the swamp milkweed, or the butterfly weed. Most of these are spreaders. So they're going to pop up around your yard. But if you got spaces for them, that's really what we want the monarchs to come and get used to and lay their eggs on is our native species of milkweed. So typically when people are really talking about natives, it almost always leads to some sort of beneficial insect like monarchs, or swallowtails is another big popular one. And getting these butterflies to land on these native plants is much better than using some of the tropicals and other things to entice them into your yard. So the reason I bring that one up is some people might plant milkweed not knowing specifically why you would plant it, and it gets eaten up and they're like, why is my plant struggling? Well, it's actually doing its job.
Yeah.
So I think there's the main two ones, which is finding the right location, making sure it's in the proper location. And then that sleep, creep, and leap theory, which is it might just be a very young plant. So
it's funny. We tell people that all the time, when we first plant stuff, a lot of times we plant in the fall, we talked about it, but so then a lot of their root systems are kind of going dormant. And so then the spring hits and they're like, hey, it hasn't really grown a lot. And I'm like, that first year, it's really trying to get acclimated. Like Mike was talking about, it's trying to send out its root system, get acclimated to your soil. Even if we're starting with larger plant material, you're not going to see a huge jump in growth a lot of times that first year. We do a lot of things with the soil, conditioning the soil, and that's all to help the root system, which you're not seeing that. But as far as the longevity and likelihood and the survivability of your plant, that's by far more important than how much green growth is shooting up.
Right.
So we're really trying to work on the root system, get it acclimated, get it established, and then it will start to grow. And so we always try to tell people, be patient, let it kind of struggle along, let it get acclimated to your soil. As long as you're keeping it watered, not too watered, but keeping it watered, let it do its thing. And like Mike was saying, it'll really start to jump, in that year 2 or 3.
Which is why maybe we'll call them traditional plants. I don't know. Your normal landscape plants are hybridized and cultivated for some of those to eliminate some of those attributes so that you see some results quicker, so that you don't have to wait and they get acclimated faster. They're more drought tolerant. They're more prone to grow faster. And then again, it's age of the plant. I mean, if most of our native plants now that we carry are 1 gallon, 2 gallon sizes, bigger, more established plants, so you're not going to have to go through a lot of this waiting. But sometimes you're right. I mean, it's being patient, and it's that first year's established year. And once it gets through that first year, usually you see you're almost past the sleep phase. It's the creep phase that you're getting through the first year. And then the next year is the leap. But sometimes it could be 3 years. So it's just a little bit of patience.
A little patience. All right, cool. So do you think we'll ever see a change in opinions about native plants, or will they continue to be decisive amongst gardeners?
I mean, I think Mike even kind of said this, to start the podcast, is I do think it's kind of cyclical, Right. I mean, it comes and goes in fads. And, from our end, like I said, we introduced a program here locally where, you could get different grants, especially as a watershed grant if you're on the water, planting different natives and stuff. And that we saw a huge spike in people calling interested in native gardening. when you get into it, you realize it's not as easy, and it's not this magical program that just gives away free money. But
and availability of plants.
That's probably the hardest part for me, is for people who are truly going full native. Finding something that is a true native can be difficult, finding availability of it, because again, they don't necessarily show particularly well in pots. What we were just saying is, so from a retail standpoint, you know, you it's hard to bring in plants that, while they might be a great plant, they don't look necessarily particularly great throughout the year. And, you know, we always carry things that are in bloom and doing, you know, showing out, because we want people to see them, get excited about them, and want them in their yard. Well, if they don't show very well as a retail plant, retail growers aren't going to grow a ton of them, which means the availability becomes difficult. And there are growers that are, you know, there's a great little grower over here that sticks to pretty much just natives, but it's a smaller operation. And so it's just availability can really be the issue. And that's when we really get into the, how much of a stickler are you for a native? And I think that is probably what's more here to stay, is the native versus the native R discussion.
Right.
Because again, you know, native R's, or you get a little bit of the best of both worlds. But if you're a stickler for a true native, they would probably argue that does not count as a native. So I think it'll come and go, but I do think natives are here to stay, and I think there's always going to be a market for them. Just how hot that market is, I think, will be a little bit more cyclical.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think it's the debate is always going to be around. You know, it's a debate that we've talked about with organic gardening. I mean, you know, it's like, you know, as soon as you water the tomato with, you know, your tap water, is it organic anymore? I don't know. So it's like, how deep do you really want to go? I think native plants are great. I think you probably already have some. I think don't make it super controversial. Buy some natives, implement them into your landscape if you can. Try some different things. Have fun with it. I mean, we're finding some really, really good options in here. I mean, I think milkweed is the best one. You know, a lot of people are getting into supporting the monarchs. I think it's a great thing that you can do if you've got space for some of the I'm not gonna say aggressive, but some of the spreading types, they're awesome. If you don't, then try the butterfly weed. It's a nice, compact, little shrubby perennial that comes back year after year. And there's lots of other things. I mean, you know, remember prickly pear cactus? We rarely even sell it, but that's native. I mean, so there's lots of different things. Bayberry. Bayberry is wax myrtle, which is a great hedge plant, especially for wet areas. It's what the Native Americans used, the indigenous people that use for mosquito control, because it's got a natural fragrance to it. So there's lots of things. Pink muhly grass is a native. We use that all the time in landscape. It's one of our biggest selling grasses in the fall season. So you probably have them already. Don't make it controversial. Start implementing some into your landscape. Absolutely. I think you'll have fun with it.
Mix it up a little. Anything else from you guys?
I think that's it. Like I said, if you like them, use them, and, you know, again, don't be scared of them, and just enjoy it.
There you go. I think it's a good way to end it.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks, guys. This was good. We got into it, and we didn't make it very controversial. No arguments here. So thanks, everybody, for listening to the Bros of Gardening. You know, wherever you're listening, whatever podcast form you're using. And then, of course, if you're watching us on YouTube, definitely like, rate, review, subscribe, all of those great things. Leave comments, and we'll see you